And all right, we've got another special edition of Inquisitive Souls in our financial series, which is basically me repurposing Jeff Bouwman, my buddy and business partner, some of his amazing conversations that he's had with people about finances. And on this episode, it's with the great and powerful and awesome Ryan Snow, who I had the opportunity to meet a few years ago at the Front Row Dads Retreat put on by John Vroman. And I'll let Jeff do all the heavy lifting here. I'll just do a quick intro. So Ryan is a #1 best-selling author, sales leader, business coach, and teacher at heart, with over 7 years in a classroom and 7 more as a business coach and mentor. His mission is to help people achieve extraordinary results in life and in sales through personal and professional development. He's written a book, The Miracle Morning for Salespeople, with Hal Elrod and Honorée, which expands Hal's original Miracle Morning message of exponential growth by seizing the first vital hours of the morning to grow personally by connecting that personal development with professional development habits to increase sales. And I can speak from personal experience. I've been up since 3:45 today. I'm recording this episode or this intro at 5:07 in the morning. Seize the morning. All right. So anyways, I will stop rambling here because this is not my show. Well, it's my show, but it's not really my episode. And I will let the amazing Jeff Bouwman have an awesome conversation with Ryan Snow about all things money.
All right, super excited about today's guest, Mr. Ryan Snow. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm excellent, Jeff. Hey, man, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. You know, I've been thinking about this call all week. We met back in the fall, and we've gotten together a couple times and had a few conversations, and I'm super excited about some of the content you're going to bring to this audience. So maybe just on that, take a minute and tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I am married. I'm a dad of 3. I am in my mid-30s, and I come from a sales background, initially in direct sales with Cutco. I've done some sales in I sold timeshare for a little bit. I worked in mortgages. I spent a little bit of time in a classroom, about 7 years teaching and being a lead teacher. And last 5 years, I've sort of hung my hat in real estate sales. And I got the opportunity to write a book on sales with Hal Elrod. We did the Miracle Morning for Salespeople together. And so that's really my big background is sales. We do a lot of travel, I would say. I'm a huge fan of experiences. That's a big focus of mine. And I do a lot of like coaching and training around sales at this point.
Yeah, and I've seen some of that. We've talked about your training before, and I know there's some really interesting things in that training itself. Some of it centered around finance too, and how you teach people about being responsible with their money and managing a business. So maybe just explain a little bit about how you ended up with that kind of holistic level of training for salespeople. What experiences through your career led you to have that much of an approach as it relates to teaching others?
Yeah, great. So I think it goes back to my first experience running a business. I mentioned that I was in direct sales. Initially, I started my career with Cutco Cutlery, and so they're a direct sales company, and they sell high-end kitchen cutlery. And I got my start with them just as a sales rep. I did fairly well in the beginning, and I made it through my first year. I moved into like an assistant management position in my office, and I was coaching and training people. And the next year, I went out and opened my own branch office. And I was really good at connecting with people and recruiting and training. And so I created quite a bit of revenue. But what I didn't do is I didn't manage expenses well. And so if anything, I would say my biggest failure initially was around finances. And I understood money, and I knew that I needed to spend it in order to grow, but I didn't track like return on investment well. I just didn't pay enough attention to what I was doing. I was like 23 years old, so my personal expenses, the more money I was making, the more I was spending. I was buying a new car and joining a country club and just doing silly things that I wouldn't do now. And so out of necessity, basically, I need to learn how to make some better choices.
So let's talk about that a bit. I think that's beautiful, right? Because as you know, my story, I've definitely made some of those same mistakes. And you know, for me, and it sounds like a little bit for you, a little bit of background in our careers as it relates to finance. For me, a big portion of my career is obviously finance, but I still made some of those mistakes. So talk a little bit about growing up and, you know, the money messages you received from your parents, from people outside of your home, and also, you know, I guess looking back, what are the things that you would have liked to have learned in, elementary and high school that would have prepared you for those types of things in your career?
Yeah, so I think the first lesson that I learned from my parents is that in order to have money, you needed to work really hard, right? So that's a blessing and a curse all at once. It's a blessing in that I have an extreme work ethic that certainly outmatches most people, I think, and it's one of the main reasons probably for my initial success and continued success is my willingness to work hard for achieving things that I wanted. But equating the need for more time for more money is probably like a huge curse. And so that's something that I wish I learned a little bit differently. There were things that my parents did really well and things that now looking back, they probably weren't the best choices. They definitely spent more than they should have. We never went without, but we never really had any extra either. And so they would buy things and purchase things and do things that were probably extra and above and beyond that put them in a position where they then had to work more hours. And so that certainly took away from time together. My parents got divorced, which sort of tainted our money situation. Financially, that made things difficult. Another thing they did really well, though, is they used real estate as a way to move up, right? So they bought a small house and fixed it up and then sold it and bought a bigger house and fixed it up and then sold it. And so I got sort of mixed messages about money. I learned a lot of quality things about money from them, but definitely missing links around spending and making sure that we were making good choices with money. That part was probably missing, which is, I guess, why I was making the same mistakes initially too.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you kind of segued into the lessons you learned about real estate, right? And I know that's part of your career now. Talk about the experiences you had as a child, because one of the things that I encounter with a lot of people when they hear, well, let's buy a house, live in it, fix it up and sell it. And let's do that again. And a lot of people are very hesitant to do that because they feel like it's going to be hard on the kids. So I don't know if that's true or false. I guess I'm interested to hear your opinion, having lived through it. How did that impact you as a young child or young adult as you were going through that?
I actually loved it. So we stayed in the same town. So it was like now we got a bigger house, and now we have a bigger house with a pool. And now, and they didn't financially strap themselves with the houses they were buying because they were making good equity returns on the ones that they had purchased in the past through putting some work into it. Yeah. So I think it was a great lesson. Actually, I think there was huge benefits to that. I could see how moving around different communities and having to like pick up the family and make new friends everywhere you go and starting over every couple of years, I would see that as being rough. But I never really had to do that. Like we stayed fairly local. They used it as an opportunity to build wealth.
That's great. So. And did you switch schools at all, or were we always in the same schools?
I did switch schools, but the timing actually worked out pretty well. So I went to kindergarten in one elementary school and then started first grade in the next elementary school. And then we didn't move again until I was in middle school. And so after that, there was only one middle school and one high school in the town. So there was really no changes beyond that one sort of shift.
I like that. So there's opportunity to look at, taking advantage of that opportunity and living in a house and flipping it without having to necessarily pick up and relocate. And I know that was the thing for me, right? I moved many, many, many times growing up, but it was always to a different community. And so I switched schools over and over again. My parents did build up equity that way, but I don't think it was intentional the way your parents did it. So is that what led you eventually into real estate, do you think? Or was there another path that led you up to where you are?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it was like divine intervention that led me into real estate more than anything. My dad did pretty well after my parents got divorced too. He ended up purchasing a 4-family, which now funds a good portion of his ability to live in retirement. And so I guess I watched that piece of it as far as the investing piece. But when I was teaching, actually, my teacher's aide had gotten her real estate license and was working with Keller Williams, the same company that I'm with now. And she earned like twice as much in her first year in real estate as she did working as my teacher's aide.
Wow.
And we were very similar personality wise and whatever. And she knew that I had a sales background, and she just sort of convinced me, man, you just have to go for it. So my wife and I talked about it. We were starting to have kids at that point, and teacher salary. I loved teaching. I loved the kids. I loved what I did for work. but there was not really an opportunity for me to move up income wise, and it just wasn't meeting the lifestyle and standards and goals that I had set for myself and our family. And so I needed to do something, and that was the opportunity for me to make a move.
And so how is a real estate career helped you in terms of something that I know you're passionate about from the time we spent together is that whole family, work and business integration. How has that helped you being in that type of field?
Yeah, well, it's done two things, right? So one of the best parts about sales, and one of the reasons I love coaching and teaching people about selling, is one of the easiest ways to deal with money is to have unlimited income potential, right? So the hardest part about teaching was I was capped. There was a certain level that which I could reach doing what I was doing, and then I couldn't make any more money. And so I couldn't go on more vacations with my kids, and I couldn't take more time off. And so it's created freedom and flexibility for me, and the fact that I could create unlimited income. I've been able to add leverage and create a business instead of a job where we sell houses that I've never even been in before. I mean, I have agents that work for me that are out showing houses on a Saturday while I'm at the beach with my kids or up at camp or whatever. So it's allowed me to do things that I couldn't have otherwise done.
I love it. And taking from the lessons you learned early in your career, you're likely in a different spot as it relates to how responsible you are with your spending and your finances. Am I safe to
Yeah,
assume that?
there's definitely some ebb and flow. I mean, we've put some habits in place that sort of force us to save at a much higher level than we ever did before. But I think it's a constant progression of trying to make sure that as you make more money, you're not just spending more money. It's so easy to fall into now the income is there, so now we can spend it. What are all the things that we want to do and spend it on? And that's probably not the greatest use of money. The greatest use of money is actually creating freedom.
Right.
And so allowing money to create more money, which allows you to create passive income, which allows you to not have to work to create the money in the first place. That's really where the magic is. And that only comes from having excess money, which means you have to increase your income but not increase your expenses. And so I feel like that's a habit that consistently needs to be worked on. I mean, you don't want to work so hard that you create all this income that you don't spend any of it and that you don't enjoy it and you don't do things. So one of the rules that we've sort of set for ourselves, and you and I have talked about this, but share with your audience, is for me, it's all about experience. So experience over things is something that we try and live by. Right, so we'll always judge whether or not we're going to spend more money based on what's the value of the experience that's going to come from spending the money on that trip. Or like we bought a go-kart, right? We didn't buy a go-kart because I needed a go-kart for $1,500. We bought a go-kart because I knew that in talking with my neighbor, it was going to be this cool experience of building a track around the two houses and the time that me and my son would spend together in the go-kart. And so that became a decision around the experiences we were going to have in the go-kart, not just to say, oh, we have a go-kart.
Yeah, it's asking that fundamental question. I love the way you've said that, right? Is that I always ask too, is how is this serving us, right? How is this helping us towards the things that we've said in our life that are important? And for you, it's all about experiences, and I love the experiences you're creating for your family. In the go-kart example is a different one, right? Whereas people often think an experience has to be, I need to pay $5,000 or $10,000 to take a trip with my family somewhere, but an experience can mean so many different things, and sometimes you spend a little bit of money to create this invaluable experience. I think of when I was growing up, one of the things I cherish to this date is the golf membership I had, where I was out at the golf course every weekend for 6 hours at a time with my dad.
Right.
That investment that he made, we probably couldn't afford at the time, was so worth it from the relationship that we developed in the time that we had together. So when you look at things from how it serves you and the experiences it's giving you, it's going to make you, I guess, naturally be more responsible with money, but it's going to align your financial and your personal goals a lot better.
I was just going to say, we do both, right? So we do some of the bigger like trips and things like that because I like the experience piece. I like education through experience. I think showing our kids different parts of the country and the world is really important. That's something that we definitely lacked. We didn't do a lot of traveling when I was a kid, so that's something I pushed to try and get my kids. But I agree with you. There's lots of opportunity to look and say, I love the question that you ask, how does this serve us, right? Because sometimes a thing does serve a purpose that creates like a ridiculous number of experiences and opportunities to sort of connect with your family and friends, and sometimes that is a purchase that makes sense even though it's a thing because of the experiences it allows for.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a beautiful thing. So maybe tell me about one of the biggest financial challenges you've had, either in your personal life or in your professional life, and how did you overcome that challenge, and what lessons did you take away from it?
Well, so I probably shared the biggest one with you already, and that was like just tanking my office, even though we had a lot of good revenue. Just we didn't create a lot of profit because I just spent and made mistakes. And so the biggest thing that I pulled from that was the importance of profit and loss. So I spend a lot of time now, like I run a real estate office. We've got 140 agents. About 12 of them act on a leadership committee with me, and we meet monthly. And the expectation is for that leadership committee is that you don't come to that meeting without your profit and loss report for your business. So I think for me that it just taught me the importance of measuring, like having a scorecard and keeping track, and then that create, and not just for the sense of having it, but for the sense that it becomes a tool, right? So now that's a tool in how to make better decisions about how we spend money in the business, and being able to check and see which things are bringing us the return on investments and which are just sort of sucking money out of our budget, so that we can double down in the areas that are bringing us the greatest return. And we do the same thing now. I mean, budget-wise, in getting out of that. So going back to when I was 23 years old and sort of tanked that business, one of the things I had to do was go ask for help. Like I went to my dad and I was like, listen, I've got like debt that I've built up, and I need to get out of this hole. And so a couple of things we did. One, he was able to borrow money at a much lower rate than I was able to. So he helped me out there and lowered my payments so I could dig my way out a lot faster. And I paid it all back, and we came up with a budget basically that I had to live on, and it was really tight. I mean, I think for a long time I had like $50 a week to live on, and that included buying any food that I bought outside of the grocery store. So that was probably one of the best experiences, though, because it taught me like you could live on minimal numbers if you need to in order to get yourself back on track. So it just taught me the importance of it, right? And so now I measure it. There's a scorecard. There's so many things that we do now that are just sort of systematized because of the lessons that I learned there.
I think that's beautiful. Two big lessons I heard right there from you, which I think a lot of people struggle with. The first is asking for help. I think the fact that you did that is probably what saved you and propelled your career to where it is today. A lot of people, as it relates to finances, from my experience, struggle with either asking for help or struggle with, how do they figure out what's the right help that they need and align it to their individual situation. But the other thing I want to just highlight here, because I think you said it beautifully. And a lot of people, when I talk about budgets with them, have this negative connotation with budgets, that it's, this thing that I must live on. That's this, they almost talk about it like it's a diet. And in some circumstances, like the life lesson you learn, because maybe that responsibility or that education wasn't there, you did end up having to live that way and look at it kind of in those terms. But now the way you look at it and what you teach to the people that you work with is that it's a tool. It's a tool. And I think the words you used were to make better decisions, right? So that you have this scorecard, you know where you're at, and you can look at that and say, okay, well, what's going to be the best path forward for us versus looking at, oh my God, we have no money, or oh my God, we can't do this. You're looking at it and asking powerful questions. And I know you talk about this in your training, and maybe, share with the viewers your thoughts around powerful questions and how you like to frame things in your own head.
As far as around the tool of the profit and loss?
Not necessarily with profit and loss, but anything that you might encounter. And I know you're very similar in terms of the way I work with my clients, is that, a lot of people will have a mindset where they have these negative thoughts that run in their head, or they're asking themselves limiting questions, where if you can frame that question in a different way, it actually opens you up to different possibilities. So instead of, why can't I do this? It's how could I do this?
Right.
Those types of things. I know you work on some of that with your training. So maybe talk us through that process and how you use that in your life.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we do a good job on is we focus on the fact that for a lot of people, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and salespeople, so a lot of people look at expenses as simply that. Like within their business, they call things expenses, and I don't. We refer to things as investments. So if I'm going to make a hire, right, I'm going to hire somebody on my team to leverage, we want to look at that as an investment, and I'm going to look at that as what is the return on investment. So I don't want to look at somebody's salary at $50,000 a year and say that's a $50,000 expense. I want to say if I were to hire this person and I were to pay them $50,000 a year, then what do I expect to see as a return in my business? Well, how is that going to free up resources to be able to create income, right? So if I hire somebody at $50,000 a year, I'm looking at how do we get them to somehow create revenue, and not necessarily directly because they're not necessarily in sales, but how does their time make it so that we can generate an extra $150,000 in sales, right? So we just shift the question. So if this is an investment and not an expense, then the question is, so what's the return going to be, right? And how quickly am I going to see that? And I think people get afraid to spend money in their business because they look at it as expense, and they also hear numbers like $50,000 and they think they're committed to that number. When you have an annual salary like that, I mean, we should be tracking like after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, are these people on track? Are they doing the things that we need to happen? Are we seeing a return right off the bat? Because if we're not, we should be only committed to maybe that first like $5 or $10 or $12,000 and say, hey, this isn't working out, and those are some coaching opportunities for us there too. So I think that's one way that we would use something like that as a tool and use those questions, and just shifting the language a little bit helps. Another way that we teach people is just to not get bogged down by numbers that are maybe too big. So I'll give you an example. I was looking at a commercial real estate development deal the other day, and the price on the property alone is like $6.5 million. And then the build out that would need to be done is like $2.5 million. Now, the reason that these opportunities exist is because for most people, those numbers would just completely scare them away. And so what we teach our clients is instead of just saying like, well, I don't have $10 million, so I can't be part of this investment deal, let's weigh out the numbers and find out what the return's going to be. Because if you've got a good return on investment in anything, whether it's a commercial real estate deal or within your business or whatever, money is easy to find. Like money will chase a good return. So you just got to sort of put yourself in a position where you can meet people. That there's all sorts of people that have money that are looking for places to put it where they can get a good return that's going to be safe. And so the question is no longer now, like, or it's not, the answer can't be like, I don't have $10 million, I'm never going to be able to do that. Like, that's the negative self-talk that we need to get away from. And the question is, okay, if I can generate a good enough return out of this, like, where could I go? Who could I talk to? Where could I go find the $10 million? What would I need to do? What are the conversations I would need to have in order to make this happen? And how can I make this an opportunity for other people to help benefit them as well? How many other partners can I pull in that could all generate success out of this? So it's just for me, that's a big mindset shift, is those two things. When we stop being afraid of the numbers, when we stop being afraid of having numerical conversations, and also when we shift to stop thinking about expenses and start thinking about them as investment.
That's beautiful. I think too many people in today's society, and whether it's how we were brought up or the anxiety and guilt that comes with money, are afraid to talk about it, right? And one of the things that many people struggle with that, I try to encourage them is take the emotion out of it. And that's very easy to say because, money is attached to feelings. And money, right. When we look for money, we're looking at what is that going to bring us in terms of certain feelings or certain results. And naturally, there's emotion that comes with it. But if you're able to look at it from a powerful perspective, ask powerful questions about it in terms of how can you and what do the numbers tell me, there's often, like you said, ways to figure it out. And, my first answer to anybody who comes to me with a business proposal is never no. It's, well, let's look at, what's on the table. And one of the examples I give right now, a lot of people ask me about the real estate market, and I'm not sure how it is in your area, but it's quite crazy where we are. So here in Ontario and Canada, houses are going in some cases for double what the asking price is. And, a lot of people are shying away from it and throwing their hands up and blaming a lot of individuals for the causes of that problem. But, the way I look at it is, where's the opportunity, right? There's still opportunities out there in any market. You just have to have your eyes and ears open at all times. And so maybe you need to be looking is in different areas than everybody else is. There could always be a way to open up, additional investment or help people and serve people if you're just looking at it from the right perspective. So
totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit of a different question. It's kind of on the lines that I was just ending up there, right? For a lot of people, what I say, if you really want to master your money, you need to first help people and use money to do that. So how do you use money in your life to serve other people?
Great question. I would say in a few different ways. So one, I use it as an opportunity to create opportunities for other people. So within my business, every time I hire somebody, I'm creating an opportunity for them with money that we've created. And then every time we can continue to grow that, we are able to offer bigger and better opportunities for the people that are in the business. So that's one way. I would say with my family, we use it as an opportunity to create freedom to be able to spend time with the family and to be able to do the things that we want to do. So whether that's travel or just spend time at the cottage or just take every weekend off and spend that time with my kids, or be able to drive my kids to school in the morning when I feel like it. So there's lots of ways that we use money to create freedom. We create opportunity, and then we invest in like charities and things that we feel like are empowering. We give money back to schools that we were connected with, and I'm really connected with Front Row Foundation. We donate to the Front Row Foundation every month, and so we just look for opportunities to give back in lots of different ways, whether it's through our business, through our family, or through charitable organizations.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned family in there, right? Because a lot of people will look at it and the immediate reaction to that question is, well, who am I helping externally? And oftentimes we need to clean up our own backyard first, right? And we really need to be looking at how is money allowing us to help the people that are the most important in our life, and are we using it in a way that allows us to free up more of our time and be there more and be more present with them, not preoccupied with other things and having things run through their heads all the time because they're so worried about these things external to them. I love that you've said, money can be used to help give you more time with your kids and with your spouse. I think that's beautiful.
I think one thing too, you just triggered something there for me, Jeff, that I want to touch on is the idea of personal development, right? So we talk about external versus internal. I mean, even my kids are external. Internal is really what I spend on me, and I spend a lot of money investing in training for myself in things like Dad's Retreat, business retreats, and GoBundance, like mastermind sessions that I go on, and so tens of thousands of dollars in a year I invest in becoming the best version of myself, because that has probably the most dramatic effect on improving the lives of the people around me, in my house, in my family, in my business, and everywhere else, basically, because I can only give what I've allowed myself to sort of fill up to. And so every time I level up, I'm able to pour more into other people.
I couldn't agree more, and I think those things are so interrelated, right? When we think about self-development and relationships, for example, is a lot of times the self-development that we need comes through building different relationships that maybe we've been exposed to before, and with having access or being responsible or getting a return on investment allows us to experience those things. The better the relationships we have and the more we spend on self-development, the more people we end up helping and the more money that ends up coming in. So they're all so closely related, and the more we elevate one, the more it allows us to elevate others if we choose to let it do that.
Definitely.
Beautiful. So, as we reflect back, one thing I want to ask you, because I know we've had this discussion before, and I think people need to hear it, right? Because there's a lot of experts out there that are telling people that debt is terrible and you should be ashamed if you have debt. Many forms of debt, I would tend to agree with some of those experts, but if you use debt as a way to improve investments and, use it to leverage something, it can actually be good for you. So maybe talk a little bit about your methodology there and what you think as it relates to debt, because I know you see it as something that can be used as a tool as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess take everything I say with a grain of salt for one thing, right? Because I am a huge fan of red light, green light, which means only spend money as it comes in.
Yep.
At the same time, I'm also somebody who would create zero profit in my business in order to reinvest in the right people and the right marketing to expand exponentially within a shorter period of time. Right? If I thought I could 5x my business by spending all of our revenue this year because it made sense and the right things, and I was seeing the return on investment and knew that if we doubled down now, I might go a little further in spending this year. But as a real estate person, I mean, debt, the right types of debt are a huge tool and opportunity for people, right? So if I were to purchase even like a multifamily home, right, and I put 25% down, I'm taking 75% of that, and I'm using debt to be able to make that deal happen. So if I buy a $500,000 three-family home and I'm borrowing like $375,000 of it in order to make that deal happen, but I can make it so that that deal pays all of that debt back without ever coming out of my pocket, then there's a way to use debt to be able to build long-term wealth. I mean, there's definitely reasons for having debt. And one of the things that, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I'm a huge fan of experiences. Even when we didn't have money, like I've been on a trip to go to a friend's wedding in Yosemite that I paid for on a credit card. And we did that because I knew that that was an experience that I could never get back, and I can make that money, right? And so I think even just that mindset shift from lack to abundance is huge. I mean, there's plenty of money out there. It's not hard to go make more money. I think you just have to be careful of not overdoing that. Like, I can't go, oh, well, I can make more money, so I'm going to go buy a $100,000 car even though I make $30,000 a year. Or, oh, I can make more money, so I'm going to go buy a new $5,000 stereo system because I really like music. Those aren't necessarily quality of decisions that are going to help move your life forward or make you feel like you had a better quality of life. But if I died tomorrow and I remembered going on that trip, that would be one of the greatest decisions I ever made in my life, was for my wife and I to take that trip together and to hike Half Dome. Like, that's something that we could never sort of get back, that opportunity. And so those are places where I would decide that a little bit of debt is okay, and that I don't have to worry about it. I know that I'll make that money and I'll come up with a plan to pay it back. And we just need to make good choices and sort of ask the right questions about why it's important. Again, what do you value? Like, I forget exactly how you phrased it earlier, but what's sort of the benefit of this for us?
Yeah, how's it serving you?
Exactly. Right? How's it serving you? Yeah, so if we go back to that question, for me, certain things, there are times when debt serves us. And so real estate deals, things like that, debt can definitely serve us. Trips and experiences that maybe we could never get back that are once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, I'd figure out a way to pay it back. It's worth it. So.
Yeah, we do the same thing. I mean, we actually take a little bit of a different approach because we do have this mentality of not spending money before we have it. What we do is at the start of the year, we sit down and say, what are those experiences that we want to have as a family this year? And what are those experiences we want to have as a husband and wife? Mm-hmm. And, because I made decisions in my career to really take a step back and be more present for my family, I don't have the income levels that I used to. And what we do is we say, okay, well, these are the experiences, these are the things that we want for ourselves this year to make it the best year for us possible. And we quantify that. We say, well, what is that going to cost us? That's money that we don't have today. So we don't just automatically say, well, we can't do it because we don't have that money. We say, okay, those are the things that are important to us this year. We're confident that we're going to figure out ways to bring in the income that are going to allow us to create those experiences. And over the last 2 years, we've been able to do every single one of them because we have that abundance mindset, like you said, and we're just opening ourselves up to opportunities because we know we need to go find this income because we really want those experiences in our life. And sometimes it's hard because you have to sit down and say, is this the right decision in the moment? And I'll give you the perfect example because this just happened to us in terms of how to, from a business perspective, a couple changes happened to me in the recent month. And my wife and I were planning to go on a trip at the end of May. And we sat down last week and said, well, the income isn't where we thought it was going to be at this time. That stuff happens in life. So how do we want to adjust? And we could do, we didn't have a choice of we're not going to take a trip. The choice was, when can we delay the trip to, and how do we want that trip to look now? And so instead of having a separate trip for my wife and I and a separate trip for the kids in August, we're going to combine the two and make them both, more epic than one of them would have been on their own. So there's always ways to do it. It gives us a couple more months. It allows us to, be in a position when we go on that trip and we have that experience that we're not sitting there worrying about the money that maybe we didn't have. Had it been an opportunity like we had last year, where we had really good friends of ours getting married out of country, I wouldn't have missed that for the world.
Right.
So you have to look at every single one, like you said, and really ask yourself how it serves you, and are you going to have that opportunity, and is this something you're going to value? And if it does, you make the right decisions because you have that abundance mindset, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think you brought up a good point there too, which is a piece that a lot of people struggle with is the ability to wait for anything at this point. And so part of the reason people struggle with money is the need to have everything right now. Right? You didn't say we're not going to take the trip. You said let's just push the deadline back and make sure that we still do those things that were important to us. We're just going to make a better financial decision so that we're not losing out on something else later on because we made a poor decision now.
Yeah, and 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen is when you finally take that trip, you're going to be in a much better place mentally because you did it, right?
Right, and you won't be worried about what it took to be there because you didn't do it until you could actually afford to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, the reason I brought up that question was because I knew how you would answer it in terms of real estate, and I think that's an important lesson, right? If you have a mentality that all debt's bad, there's many things that you could miss out on. One is the diversification of your assets and maximizing your tax situation because you're not taking advantage of all the investment opportunities that you have available to you. And real estate is definitely one that I advocate people should be looking at. I talk to many clients in their situation, and we look at it, and they're maxing out on a 401k and an IRA. They're paying a ton of fees on that stuff, and they've got this money sitting there not being optimized, and it's in a savings account not earning anything when they could be reducing taxes, exponentially increasing their returns by utilizing debt and leveraging that to have real estate investments. It's a huge opportunity that I think a lot of people close their eyes to. It needs to be done the right way, and this brings me back to what you said. One of the big things was asking for help, right? So if you don't know how to do these different things, just ask for help. There's many people out there you can trust in many different areas that can help you really elevate your life and create this mentality of abundance that you mentioned a couple times through this podcast. So I love that. Let me ask you one thing that relates to your kids, because you had certain lessons that you grew up and you're learning different things now. What's one thing you're doing to teach your kids about money?
I think with my kids, one thing that I teach them is that money doesn't matter, that freedom matters, right? So for me, money is just a vehicle to freedom when it's used properly. So if I could teach them anything, that's what I wish I learned earlier, and that's the one thing that I would like to get across to them. I think money is important to a point initially when you're trying to make ends meet, right? When you're trying to make it so you can feed yourself and have a house and those basic needs are met. But after that, I want them to realize that it's not as hard as it seems, that money is out there everywhere, and that we just need to make decisions around things that create more freedom and opportunity for us to have choices.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, right? And so let me ask you this, right? Because people hear that word quite often. A lot of people like to say that, is that money gives you freedom. What is freedom? Like in your mind, what is freedom?
Freedom's the ability to do what you want, when you want, and how you want to do it. So there are choices that you can make today that are going to open up opportunities for you to do what you want, when you want, how you want to do it in the future.
Right. And if we keep our eyes and minds on the question of how does this serve us, we'll definitely, be looking at the right level of income so that we can have the right freedom for ourselves. Because I think what a lot of people attach to when they think freedom, it's, well, I got to be a multi-millionaire to be able to do the things I want when I want to do them. But in reality, some of the things they may be wanting to do are because they've never had it, or they see other people and they automatically assume they're happy because they have these things in their life, when most times it's because of the experiences they're having.
Yeah, and I think people put too big a price tag on the things that they would really want. Like that Tony Robbins wrote on money. I didn't get a whole lot out of it, that I loved everything about that book, but one thing that I found that was really helpful was an exercise that he walked people through, and we do this as part of our training too, is what would it actually cost to have the life that you want? People have these grandiose ideas about what it would cost to have the life that they want, but when my wife and I sit down and talk about what's really important to us and what we really want, so we've got a family cottage on a lake, and we've found that that's the place that we're happiest. Like, that's where we have the most freedom with our kids to do the things that we love to do, and be outside and go fishing and go hiking and go water skiing, and that's where our kids are happiest, and that's where we're the most connected with them and the most disconnected from everything else, and that's the piece that we enjoy. Well, the cost of us to have a lake house is not really that expensive in the grand scheme of things. If you figure good debt, like you said, for a piece of real estate, and you only need to save up 25% of the cost of that house, and then basically you've got a monthly payment that's building equity for you over the next 30 years, and that's the thing that you enjoy most, that's a really minimal cost to have that level of happiness. So I think clarity and sort of focus around what actually is important to you and how it serves you, like you said, is something that maybe people need to spend a little more time on, that clarity piece. Like, I don't need a Ferrari or a Lamborghini for me to feel happy. I don't need a $200,000 car. I'm very clear about the things that we want that serve our family.
Yeah, and most times when people do have that Ferrari or whatever sports car they have, they realize that they're happy for a
Right.
moment, and that's it, and it's fading, right? Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think it's extremely valuable for people to understand what the true cost of their life is, and what are the things in their life that they have today that maybe they don't have to have, and that their path to freedom is maybe a lot shorter than what they think. One of the exercises that I take my clients through is, and I forget where it comes from. I always forget this individual's name. It's not mine, but it's life planning. So I do life planning aligning with financial planning, and a couple of the questions you ask is, if you were to die tomorrow, what are the things that you'd really want to have experienced in your life? And when you start to dig in at that level, you start to understand what it is really that intrinsically is going to make you really happy. And once we understand those things, then when we link over to the financial side, we can say, what are these things that we thought we wanted? What are these things that we need to have? What are these things that we know are going to make us happy? Then we can create a solid financial plan that links into those. You mentioned Tony's book. I've read it, and he's got a shorter version, which is called Unshakable too, which is really good, and I think it demystifies this whole investment industry. And if you haven't read that book, I encourage you guys to do it. There's good things and bad things, like you said in there, Ryan. What's another business or finance book that you've read recently that you would want to recommend?
Oh God, so I would say that there's two books that I feel like are the ultimate, and one is Secrets of a Millionaire Mind, T. Harv Eker, and that's all about the mindset piece around money and overcoming some of like the negative things or bad habits that we learned, because I'm a huge fan of the fact that positive habits actually create everything for us, so negative habits are going to detract, and that T. Harv Eker's book like floored me. I've read it like 3 or 4 times now, and I get something out of it every time. It actually brought me back to one of the reasons that I felt like it was important for me to be an entrepreneur and step out of being an employee, is because I watched my dad be an employee for somebody for 30 years and create wealth for somebody else. And when it was his time, basically, he was just laid off for a few months severance, and that was nothing compared to what he poured in. He was the vice president of operations and basically took the place, and he was the empire builder. and received none of the benefits. So that book, I think, was really cool in connecting with some of the things we learned as kids and how they affect the way that we make financial decisions now and how to overcome some of those things. So that is definitely one of the top ones. And then Robert Kiyosaki's Cash Flow Quadrant, which is about getting out of the employed and self-employed role into business owner and investor, and the ability for money to create money for you. Because I think passive income is just such a huge overlooked piece for most people. So that every decision I make now around income is how do I make my income more passive at this point, and that's what that book talks about.
And for those that haven't had a chance to read some of his other books, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and his method to investing, I would highly recommend taking advantage of any one of the books in his series, because he actually started out from the same perspective that I did, and that he wanted to teach kids about money and realized that parents needed to understand it as well. So, hey, Ryan, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Miracle Morning and writing the book with Hal.
Sure, yeah. So Hal and I actually had met way back when at Cutco, like 15, 16 years ago. And just as acquaintances, we stayed connected through the Front Row Foundation, actually. John Vroman was a mutual friend of ours. And so on and off had met at different things. In fact, they were on that same trip to see another set of our friends, John and Mara, get married out in California when we used my credit card to go on a trip that we couldn't afford. And so we stayed connected. I ended up being in his group coaching program prior to him launching the Miracle Morning book, the original book. And in that group coaching program, he had asked for a handful of people to step up as volunteers to help him launch the book. He was teaching the Miracle Morning in his coaching. So I had already been doing the Miracle Morning for almost a year by the time the book came out. And through helping being on that launch team and seeing that book take off and trying to help promote it everywhere, we started having some conversations around what I loved about it and where were some areas for improvement. And the one thing that I had said I wanted, Miracle Morning, basically, for anyone that doesn't know, is just a morning routine of some of the 6 most powerful principles of self-development, basically, to kickstart your day. And I said I loved the personal development of it, but I wanted to see something that would drive my business immediately afterwards. And so we started throwing around the idea of this book for salespeople, and the idea that people that were in sales and entrepreneurs and things like that run small businesses needed this probably more than anybody. And after enough conversations, he was like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we just write it together? So it's been such a cool experience. I mean, it's a long experience, right? So it's writing a book. It's hard. I found that out. I think it'll be easier the second time. I'm working on one right now. But it's created passive income, which is really cool. Anytime that you can write words out that not just one person can see, but like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people can buy them and be impacted by them, you're able to create more value. And anytime you can create more value in the world, you're going to get paid more money. It's just a byproduct of the value you create. So it's been a great opportunity for that, and it's led me down the path of we've created a workbook for it now. And there's a one-day training that I'm doing privately for organizations that hire me to come in and train their salespeople, basically. It's an interactive one-day workshop, and we're actually in the process of building out a 2 or 3 day workshop, which will probably the first one will happen either the end of summer or beginning of this fall, where people will just be able to buy a ticket and come out and take part in a 2 or 3 day event, which I'm really looking forward to. It's been hugely impactful, the one-day trainings, and I can't wait to build out this 2 to 3 day workshop, because the amount of hands-on and implementation that happens during the training is my favorite part. So that's it, man. I get fired up about this stuff. I can talk about it forever.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I get fired up about it too. And I get fired up in looking at some of the content and the workbooks and the training that you're doing. And I'm so excited for what you've created for that audience. Hey, Ryan, thank you very much for coming on the show. You have contributed a ton of value that I know people are just going to love. So thank you very, very much. And I can't wait to talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate you, man, and all the value you put out there and helping your clients. And I'm excited to be able to share this message with your listeners. So thanks for having me.
Awesome, Ryan. So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that? What's the best way?
Yeah, so explosivesalesgrowth.com.
Awesome. All right. Take care, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
And there you have it. That was interview number 2 in our Your Income, Your Life financial series on Inquisitive Souls. Thanks to Jeff and Ryan for the amazing conversation. And there's more to come. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you learned a lot. And seriously, guys, if you want to redefine your relationship with money, learn more about it, learn why you think the way you do, and also learn how to talk to your fucking spouse about money, which is like a life-changing skill to have. Jeff's your man. Okay, so I'll include the links to all his awesome stuff, communities, book, course in the show notes page, and we will catch you next time.